I have two supplementary questions. One is related to something more detailed. In particular, the recent US Department of Commerce proposed export controls on 14 categories of technology. And I think it has some impact on Singapore, in particular what Minister mentioned in terms of investments as well. Whether he can share with me or with the House whether there will be potential impact on Singapore in terms of investments and potential tech-related restrictions that US imposes on China and how it affects Singapore's companies as well. That's the first question. Second is whether Minister can share, Minister highlighted about the trade and tech, trade diversions and supply chain changes in the region. Other countries are also doing efforts to pull in some of these trade diversions into their countries. Can Minister share EDB's strategies in terms of reaping some of the benefits of pulling some of these production networks into Singapore, if any? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, let me deal with the first one. Indeed, the restrictions on export of what is deemed as a sensitive technology will have implications for the entire global technological ecosystem. In the short term, various companies and countries may be able to take measures to shift their production or supply chains elsewhere. This is what we call the substitution effect. But in the longer term, what we are most worried is that it will lead to a bifurcation, if not a fragmentation of the entire technology space. If that happens, then we are all for the worst of it, because it means that the global production system cannot be optimized as a whole, but you'll be sub-optimized in parts. This will lead to increased costs, a fragmented production chain, and so forth. So that will be the greatest concern. Our Singapore strategy remains that we will try to be able to interoperate across the different jurisdictions and different systems. But we must also inspire confidence in people who put their investments here, that even in such a world, we are able to manage the different sensitivities across different countries properly. On your second part about the shifts in the global supply chain, indeed, to use a very specific example, some people have said that various productions and supply chains have shifted out from China in the global reorganization of the product chain. Some of it will come to some parts of the region around here. Some of it might come to Singapore. But I must say that Singapore doesn't compete with the rest of the regional economies for the entire shifts in the global production chain. There are some things that we do much better. There are some things that they will not be reallocated here. The simple example is this. For what we call the low mix, high volume production, most of them will not come to Singapore because they compete on the basis of scale, labor cost, land cost. But what will come to Singapore will be what we call the high mix, low volume. This is where trust, standards, quality, assurance, IP, intellectual property protections will become very important. And we have seen more of such investment siting in Singapore. So just to give an example, last week when I went to GSK to open the new facilities, today's precision medicine is no longer just producing high volume at low cost. Those kind of medicine and drugs will probably shift to other countries where there is a cost competitive advantage. But GSK will be very keen to work with EDB to site their high mix, low volume pharmaceutical products in Singapore. Why? Because for such high mix, low volume production, they require speed to market, which means that your supply chain, your distribution networks must be robust. That we do better than most other countries. For such industries, it will require a strong IP regime where people can enforce their intellectual property. That we also do well. For such productions to happen in small batches, high volume, you require a certain agility in your regulatory framework, which we also do well. So there are and there will be sectors that will play to Singapore's advantage, but it doesn't mean that everything that moves out of China or moves out of India will necessarily come to Singapore, and that's not our strategy.